All right, so thank you everyone for joining us for today's session, Make It Real, Contextualizing ESOL Instruction Around Life and Work in the US. This webinar is hosted by the Florida Literacy Coalition and made possible through the generous support of the Florida Department of Education, Division of Career and Adult Education. So before we get started, I would like to turn your attention to some of the controls. At the bottom of your screen, you will see an unmute button. If you are not already familiar with Zoom, please unmute yourself to ask questions, but you could also use the chat box to ask questions, introduce yourself there as well. We will be sharing resources, links, and maybe some other things through the chat box. So keep an eye on that. Other than that, we are going to be enabling closed captioning. So if you see that little CC come up at the bottom of your screen, you can open live captioning. All right, so with that, I will go ahead and introduce our presenter for today. Our presenter, again, is Vanya Aguilar from Florida State University. And Vanya has been teaching for ACE of Leon County since 2005, where she has taught evening classes and English learners around the world. Currently, Ms. Aguilar is a program manager at the Florida State University Center for the Advancement of Human Rights. She conducts classes for adult students, which she incorporates in which she incorporates information about services and remedies for victims of various crimes, including human trafficking. She's also a regular presenter with us at FLC. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Vanya.
Thank you, Nicole, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad that you are going to share this hour and 15 minutes with us. I'm sure that you have a lot to share as well. Please feel free to share in the chat, to unmute yourself if you would like. As Nicole said, I have been teaching for a number of years now. I work with Florida State University as well, and I train a lot of our interns on working with the immigrant community. Right now, I have a whole group of interns whom I train to conduct classes and mock interviews with people that are applying for citizenship, and that has been a very exciting project. Today, we're going to be talking about life and work. This is something that most of our students, our ESOL students, are very interested in learning more about when they come to the United States. We have to take into account that they have a lot going on, and cultures come into play when they move to a new country. It's not just the language, but a lot more. A lot of things are completely different in their home countries. We'll talk about that. And just resources and information that I've used within my classes. I'm not going to go a lot into theory and all of that. I'd like to share more of activities that I have used, that I have found helpful with my students over the years, teaching all kinds of proficiency levels, as well as people from many different countries. At the moment, I am mainly teaching online classes. I have been teaching online classes since 2010. We try to make it really interactive with the students. I have students from South America, from Korea, from China, from Afghanistan, from Iran. I have students from many different parts of the world, and it is really nice to learn from my students. I don't consider myself just an educator, but really a facilitator in the class, so that there is a lot of discussion going on, so that they are empowered to actually hold this class, and they're reliable also for forming part of this group, that it's not that they are learning from just coming to this class, but that they're learning from one another as well, and that I am learning from them. Like I said, cultures really count. They come from so many different backgrounds. Our students not only come from many different backgrounds as far as the culture goes in the countries, but also the educational background that they bring is completely different. I have students who have only finished elementary school in their home countries. I've had students in the past that have been completely illiterate in their first language. And I have students who have college degrees, including students who've had PhDs in their home countries and now are trying to start a new life here and learn English. And they have different kinds of goals in life. And so it's really important to take all of that into account. I really like to learn more about my students from the very beginning. So I like to conduct surveys. Have any of you conducted surveys with your students at the very beginning of the semester as your students actually enter your classes? Hands up? No? Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing. So that is,
Yes.
thank you, Laura. Yes, that is absolutely very important just to learn more about our students. I know that many of our programs do have very general questions and different kinds of surveys that they conduct with the students. Our orientation, I don't find them as helpful because the students don't share as much. They don't have a lot of time during the time that they have orientation. And so I haven't found those necessarily very helpful. I like to conduct, as an instructor, as an educator, I like to conduct my own survey just to get to know the students a little bit better. I always like to share about me as well so that the students kind of personalize everything. You know, the students actually get to know me as well. And that they feel free to actually share. I like to share very relevant information that they can actually take from the class and be able to apply it the next day. I also like to have students take part on what they want to learn. And that's part of the survey process as well. I like to find out what their goals are and what is it that they want to learn, sometimes even on a week by week basis, asking questions. When I used to have a classroom, what I used to do is have a box in which students could put in cards where they could write down words that they had heard or words they wanted to learn or topics that they wanted our class to cover, so that they could see that this was not just my class, it's our class. Building a community definitely makes a difference, as I'm sure that all of you know. So the Florida Department of Education has different competence subject areas, right? And these are just the areas that they list when it comes to work in life. This is very, very useful because this is exactly what they go day in and day out. I find that when I break it into these categories, that most of what the students are actually putting in that box. Right now, what I do with my online students, I conduct a survey. In the survey, or I develop a form asking them to submit on a regular basis topics that they want to discuss, and they end up almost always falling in one of these categories. Because that is what applies to them. So what have I done in the past with students? I like to always talk about community events. I look in different places, for example, the city website, or different local organizations that put up events. I bring in information, we talk about those in the class, again, to build that sense of community within the classes. I know newspapers are really not something that that people get delivered as much anymore, but we have the online news, right? And I tend to actually rely on that as well, just to bring in different kinds of articles, current events, for students. Sometimes just bringing in a title of a news article brings in a lot of conversation. It starts a conversation, and also you are asking the students, what do you know about this already? Have you heard about this already? So that they can actually practice their English. If it's a beginner level class, of course, creating vocabulary together, having the students to be really part of that entire process. I love to share city announcements, especially those that say we're going to have, a gardening class, or we're going to have this other class. We have a lot of those, and I'm hoping that that is the same all around the state. Daily life activities, that's really, really important, especially when you are directing the instruction with what the students have told you that they need. If they need more information about work, if they need more information about communicating with the doctor, if they need more information about communicating with their kids' schools, all of that, resolving issues as well. That is something that I like to discuss, because it is very much connected to culture. And not to say, okay, this is the way we do it here and this is the only way, but really exploring different options for them. Online applications now, a lot of information is now put out online, not only employment applications, but many other kinds of forms that they need to complete online. And I always like to integrate this into classes. um, I am a person that supports the way Google works. Um, Google Classrooms is amazing, but there are so many free applications that you can use to create like forms, to create documents that you can use with your students. And this is all free and at everyone's fingertips. And it is good for your students actually to start learning that technology, because a lot of, even in the work environment, a lot is gearing towards that, learning how to navigate all of those kinds of forms online. Have you noticed that even now, even before COVID, but through COVID, you can actually submit an application for, let's say, a car loan, and they want you to sign everything to like DocuSign. And so they send you all of that. You don't have to actually go into the bank many times and sign the forms there. Everything is geared towards online. So this gets students to practice all of those skills so that it's transferred to their daily life. Um, so this is something that I also like to do with my students. Not only do I conduct kind of like a questionnaire that I like to keep to get to know the students, but I want my students to build that sense of community too, even if it's an online class that is very, very doable. So I like to get students to interview one another in online classes. You can do breakout sessions and break your class into smaller groups. It's a lot of fun to do that with them. And you can jump from breakout room to breakout room in the classroom, of course. This is a lot of fun to do, because students learn from each other and they're practicing their skills, their English skills, as well as their social skills. I have, by the way, before I forget, and please remind me at the very end, this PowerPoint and a lot of other activities that I want to share with you is in a Google folder that I will share the link with you at the end of the session. I have just a sample kind of questionnaire that I use with my students. It's very simple. It's only like 5 questions, and sometimes I add more depending on the students. You actually know your students better than anybody else, and you know whether you need to add questions. So what I have on the Google Drive is just to give you kind of an example or questions that you can start with and then add more to it or take off. I like to start out my class to build that sense of community with many times creating recipes. Why do you think that many times I'd like to do this? And I know that it depends on actually the proficiency level for your students, right? And if you have a multi-level class as well, partnering people, breaking them into groups. But why would you think that that I like creating recipes with my students? Anybody? I find to allow students to share about what they value from absolutely Patrick. And that's exactly why Patrick says for students to share what they value from their cultures. Students love to share about their cultures. They want other people to know. They want to share with the instructor, and this is a way not to build that sense of community. What we have done in my program is we have created recipe books that can be distributed electronically. It's very easy to do with the students. They write up a recipe, even sometimes in pairs if they're from the same countries, or they can do it individually, and then they could put this whole book together. We have distributed this book around the school, and students feel so proud of that because they've created an entire book, an entire recipe book. It has been great. I know that this is not exactly how you would start with like lower beginners students, but you can actually start, and I'll share real quick with you. You can actually start with them by showing them, like cooking verbs. This is, by the way, at the very end, you will have a link to all of this Google Sheets and Google Docs that I have created. So I like to show them, for the beginner students, I like to show them pictures. It's very easy many times if you are not able to get them to understand the word, to actually show them pictures. Most of the time we have access to online resources right at our fingertips, right? You can pull up Google images and all of that. But for the activity that I was just sharing with you about creating a recipe, I like to start out with teaching them action verbs, cooking verbs, and all of that, so that the students actually start building up to the point of actually creating this recipe. So it's a process. You may not necessarily start right off with creating the recipe, but start with the vocabulary, play games with the vocabulary, make shopping lists. It can be in over a period of a few classes before you actually create that recipe with the students. Once they have mastered all of that. They like to talk about food. Absolutely. They definitely like to talk about food. And it brings a sense of their culture, but the community, building that community. That's why I like to do that. I like to follow up with, after completing recipes, about questions, letting students share with one another. So that they can actually learn from each other, especially when you have multi-level classes. You would be surprised how much you can actually depend on your students to expand on what is being conducted in class. I had class last night, and one of my students was asking, okay, so what's the difference between this, and this? And it's good that the students actually pay attention to those details, because it actually is helpful for the rest of the class. Maybe someone else has the same question. Story writing, I think that is an opportunity for students to share about their families. or share about their country, share about something important in their lives. And you can do it building it little by little, again, teaching them basic vocabulary. But it becomes really spontaneous for students to actually want to share more. And even the really, really beginner students, maybe not writing a story, but writing sentences, after studying maybe a lesson on a family tree, telling you, okay, yes, I have 3 sisters, 1 brother, what are their names, and talking about that. There are definitely ways to do this, and maybe, like I said, not a full story, but definitely shorter sentences. And they love to do this because they are sharing information about them with you into the class. Of course, employment, that's a big one, right? And with employment, we also cover a lot of cultural differences. What is something that has come up in your classes that is very different from work culture that we have in the United States? Can anybody type on the chat or tell me if you have come across anything that is very different as far as work culture? I'll share something with you. And we were just talking about it with my class yesterday, because we were discussing, okay, what makes a good employee according to many companies here? Being on time. Yes, absolutely. More hours, Mercedes. Thank you. Um, Nature of supervisor's relationship to subordinate. That is all very important. And because our students come from many different countries, and the cultural differences are big sometimes, it is very important to cover all of those differences. So it's not just about, how to look for a job and how to build a resume and doing mock interviews and doing role play, but actually covering all of those cultural issues that may come up. Um, I also like to cover what is considered her. Oh my goodness, Sheldon, you read my mind. That was going to be my first point right now. Absolutely. I was just going to cover that. It's also very important to cover harassment, sexual harassment in the workplace. Students may come from cultures in which a lot of things are allowed that are not allowed in the US, and they need to know. Yes, Mercedes. Letting them know what employee rights are as well. That's huge. Not only what makes a good employee, but also what are your rights as an employee. Covering information, when you cover information about paychecks, letting them understand what are the deductions on those check stubs, and making sure that the students know about overtime, and why those deductions take place, because many of our students don't know exactly why there are so many deductions, and why do we need to pay so much in tax from each one of their paychecks. It is good for us to actually cover those during employment. We'll cover some more about employment later in the session. This is something that this picture in particular produces a lot of conversation in my classes. I use this when I want to do a conversation class. What can you tell me just from looking at this picture quickly? The guide debt is heavy, absolutely. Sherry, thank you for sharing. So you see that all the different loans, debt that this person has, credit card, car payment, house. Even for beginner students, discussing what the word debt is. Okay, once they know what the word debt is, then they start saying, that's why there's a car and there's a house and the credit card and the, the um, bag with the money and the clock. Okay, that's because he needs to pay the house on a certain day and he needs to pay. Making sure that the students actually build that concept of, okay, credit is very important in the United States, and how do you build credit? So expand those conversations into that, and why is it important to pay on time, and how this is going to help them to build this credit record in the United States. Because some of our students come from countries that this is not a concept that they have. This is very, yes, I agree, Patrick. Yes, we also have refugees in our class, and it's very important to actually learn this. With many of our refugee students, it's very important to know for them to know how important a social security number is, and that they don't need to share it with anybody. Into debt, we also talk about credit fraud and all of that with the students, so that they are informed. Debt causes health issues. Absolutely, Nelson, I agree. So all of that is discussed with the students, causing stress. And we talk about, banks and how banks may operate. And we talk about interest rates as well. Depending on the level of students, of course, you're going to be building up. This is an activity that I find very helpful, especially with our students that are at the beginning level. Because anything in writing is very intimidating for many of our students, especially at that level. So as much as you can provide to them, I know that like I mentioned before, we have students, we have had students in our classrooms that are completely illiterate, and with them you actually have to build up and teach them in a little bit of a different way. But you know your students and you know their level. But this is something that now they even get text reminders, right? They don't even get a little piece of paper anymore, but they get a reminder via their cell phone. A lot of places are doing that, where when you take your car to the shop, for example, you make an appointment. Now the appointment is confirmed via text or via an email. So it's teaching them all of those skills, not necessarily just in writing. How many of you still have doctors that actually give you a piece of paper reminding you? Mhm. I have my kids' pediatricians that still has the little card that reminds you, they give you at the visit for the next appointment. But all the other doctors, it's really a lot through email. So teaching all of those skills, taking the opportunity of, okay, some places still give you a little piece of paper, but these are other ways that you're going to get reminders, either through text or email. Only when I requested. Thank you, Sheldon. Yes, absolutely. But doing a lot of follow-up with activities like this, not only showing them, okay, this is all we're going to do today, but showing them different ways in which this information is going to come to them. I think it's very important. It leads into a whole other conversation. I always like to cover medicine labels. I'm sure that a lot of you do as well. There is a follow-up activity to this label that I have on the Google Drive that, like I said, I'll be able to share with you. But this is always important. And with medicine labels, also covering, okay, what is an over-the-counter medication? What's the difference between that over-the-counter medication versus a prescription? Why do I like to cover that information? In many countries, antibiotics are very easy to obtain, and a lot of medication is actually easy to obtain. over the counter, whereas in the US, you have to have a prescription for certain medication. And so it's good for students to actually be aware of that, but also how to take medication. Only when Thank you, Sheldon. Absolutely. Um, Making sure that students are not going to take more than they need in this, especially at the lower level, with the lower level groups, making sure that if their kids are a certain age, that they are not able to take it, or that they're not supposed to be sharing medication with anyone else. My the grandmother of my kids, she grew up in a family that, back in her home country, grew up in a family where they had a pharmacy, her family. And so she was used to just prescribing medication to people. "Oh, just take this and take that, you know, and but showing our students that we need to be very careful with all of that in the US, bringing up all of that information, not only showing them, okay, let's talk about the instructions and let's talk about why this medication is for, but everything that they may encounter. In the past, I have asked my students, when I have multi-level classes, to bring in boxes of over-the-counter medication that they have at home, just to bring the box so that they can actually look as a group. I divide them into groups, and they can look at the warnings. What kind of warnings do you see? A lot of people don't actually look at the warnings. Years ago, when I started teaching in 2007, I believe it was, because I was at a very particular location. One of my students, we were covering this, shared that her friend the year before had taken the whole bottle of NyQuil and didn't wake up the next morning. And so I realized, oh my gosh, it is actually very important that we share this kind of information, and that we go into the warnings, and how dangerous it can be. Laura, we role play 911 calls. Absolutely. Thank you, Laura. It can be an expansion, absolutely, of a lesson like this. I love that idea, and I've done it as well. As well as checking out medical office websites. Absolutely. That's another great idea. Providing all of those resources for students too, right? In case of an emergency, okay, where do you call? And all of those different resources that are available within the community. You know your community better than anybody else, and you know the kinds of resources that you have that you can share with your students. This is something big. I know that a lot of people, even the younger generations, I grew up with checks. When I was a teenager, we had just moved to the United States, and I had to write checks for my parents all the time because that is what they had. Credit cards were not used as much, but the whole culture around writing checks is really not there anymore. However, I don't know if you've come across, but for our immigrant community, there is still a lot that takes place around either buying money orders or actually writing checks. My daughter doesn't really feel comfortable writing checks. Thank you, Patrick. My kids don't even know how to write checks. I have a 16-year-old, and we hardly ever do that. I know how to write them. Like I said, I did it for many years. Something else that I've noticed too, working with the immigrant community, I mentioned to you earlier that I work with Florida State University as an advocate for the immigrant community. So a lot of our clients, when they come in, they don't know how to write the checks to U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And they many times they can be tricked if they don't know who the pay to is and what each one of those lines on a money order means. I get goosebumps when some of our clients actually send in a completely blank money order to my office, and I get it in the mail, and it's for like $1,000, or for that green card application that is $1,225, and is two checks, one for 500, two for 500 each, and one for 225, and all three completely blank, expecting me to fill out the money order for them. But imagine how this can be dangerous for them. So teaching them, that a money order is actually like cash, that anybody, if it's blank, that anybody can just cash it. Write it out to them and cash it. So I do go over with my students over this, because they are very trusting of people sometimes. Yes, mail theft is, yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mercedes. We cover that in my class as well, that things may get lost and I may never get those money orders. I give them instructions actually to my clients here and to my students as well. I write down a sample money order always to make sure that they don't continue to do that. And I still get blank money orders from our clients. But in the classes, I definitely overemphasize how money orders, a blank money order, if somebody gets a hold of it, that anybody can cash it, and then they're out of $1,225. A lot of us have programs that look at casas, and in casas, or uses casas to test. And in casas, we see a lot of charts. Some of our students are not really familiar with charts. And so it's always good for us to incorporate this kind of information. With information like this, it has allowed me to also talk about, portion control and nutrition and looking at servings. You know how a lot of people come and they say that in the US, everything is supersized, right? That you can get anything bigger than what a regular, portion would be. You go to a restaurant and you get a meal like for 3 different times. You can't just eat it in one sitting because it's so big. Same thing with teaching them about calories and calorie consumption. Many times teaching them about drinks, for example. Oh, it's just something to drink. Drink is just like water. What many people are not realizing, oh my gosh, let's look at the sugars and let's look at the calories and let's look at the sodium on each one of the servings. Okay, well, this size bottle is not for me to drink it in one sitting. How many servings is it? Oh, many of my students would say, it's 250 calories. Well, yes, 250 calories per serving. How many servings does each package have? It's like, 3. So 250 times 3. So that's what you're eating. So that it leads into a whole different conversation. And it just starts with a simple chart talking about recommended calories. There is another activity that you can find in the Google Drive once I share the link with you about this particular graph. This is something I really like to cover with them because we are a lot of people think of us in the United States as famous for hamburgers, right? Hamburgers, hot dogs, and that's the concept that people have, and so they come over here and there's no way that they're not going to go to to all of this fast food places. Plus, it is very sad, but the fast food places actually provide a cheaper option for people like that are busy and on the go all the time, unfortunately, not realizing, okay, let's talk about the first, let's talk about the calories. Let's keep it really simple in comparing the different calories, but then talking about nutrition and how to take care of your health. What is prepackaged food? what would be, compared to food that you would make at home. All of that information, you can actually expand your lessons into something that they can apply on a day-to-day basis. I'd like to then end it with this whole lesson on nutrition, ordering at restaurants. It is good for families, for people and friends to actually share at a restaurant, right? I'm definitely don't oppose to anything like that, and I encourage it with my students. Actually, we've had field trips in which we can go to a restaurant, end of the year field trips especially, and have fun and order and practice what we have learned in class. With ordering at a restaurant, just talking about the many different ways that people can ask on how to cook their eggs, and showing them the process. This is actually a lot of fun in the class, and also ordering a piece of meat and making sure that they are ordering it the way that they like it. Ordering sides. A lot of students actually don't know what sides really mean. Um, so ordering at a restaurant is definitely one of the things that I like. I like to share this quick video with you. I'm not going to show the entire video. Plus, you have access to this on the PowerPoint that I'm going to send to you. But so you can get a sense of sharing videos. And you can do this in the classroom. You can actually do it with online students if you are teaching online. It is very, very simple to share. I'm going to optimize so that you can actually hear everything and see.
Hello. How can I help you?
Hello. I would like a table for 4, please.
Of course. Please follow me. Here is a table for 4.
Thank you. Could you give us the menu, please?
Okay. For sake of time, I'm not going to share the entire video with you, but as you can see, it has captions at the bottom. It is at a rate in which most of our students, even at the beginner levels, can understand. It is something that you probably have covered with them in class already. And if you are able to go and take a field trip with them at a restaurant, even better, because you're expanding on that activity. But if you don't have that opportunity, then using videos in your classes is very resourceful. Oh, sorry. That's not what I wanted to do. Okay. Something that I would like to spend a little bit of time on, and this is something that I encounter a lot over the years with my students. I mentioned to you earlier that I work at FSU, and that I'm a victim advocate for the immigrant community. This is something that I have covered in my class over the years. They're not easy topics, I will definitely admit to you. However, very important topics that I think we can start conversations on, about human trafficking and about domestic violence and labor exploitation, victims of violent crimes, cancellation of removal, human trafficking, talking about what it is. I have found out over the years, actually teaching and collaborating with different educators around the state, that they've actually have had victims of human trafficking within their own classes, or if not in their own classes, but their students know the community where they live, and they suspect that there is something. I shared a PowerPoint in Spanish with a community in one of the surrounding counties to Leon County, and the one of the ladies that was in that presentation, a student from that ESOL program, called me that next week, and there was a whole group of people, at a farm close by that they knew about, that they were being held captive. And as a result of this particular student from this ESOL program reaching out, there was a whole investigation that started. There's a lot going on in that your students know about. And once they know, okay, well, they do have rights, and this is where we can call, they do reach out. And what exactly are you doing? You're empowering your students. This is information that you now know, and that you can help your own communities with it. Domestic violence, unfortunately, I have seen it more often than not. This is very, very ingrained in different cultures. Different cultures see violence in a different way. And we have found that our students are not only being challenged with the cultural part of being in a different country and the language, but also they have different internal issues within their own families, that is also impacting their learning process. Over the years, I have in our program, several victims of domestic violence have been referred to my the other hat that I wear during the day. I teach in the evenings, by the way. So they are referred to our program, and we are able to help them and also partner with different organizations for other services that they may need, such as domestic violence shelters, um, legal services for like protection orders, but also victims of human trafficking, domestic violence, labor exploitation, and victims of violent crimes might be eligible for certain immigration relief. I find that it is helpful that we know the resources we have around us within that communities and find out if there are organizations that actually help immigrant victims of crimes, because it's a very difficult topic. You may want to do an initial introduction, but when it comes to asking more of those kinds of questions that requires an expert, guest speakers actually are can provide so much to your classes and information that your students will be able to benefit from. um, I've had dozens and dozens of people that have been referred to our center specifically for this. Something else that I'd like to cover with my students, especially because many of them fear of being deported, is cancellation of removal. This is an immigration remedy that is available for people that have been here for over a period of 10 years, and that they can actually provide proof with paper trail that they have been here that many years. They have to show that they are people that have strong ties to the United States. What do I mean by strong ties? Children, U.S. children born, children in the US, that they probably have lived in the same place for a very long time, that they haven't committed any crimes, they're good people of moral character. Let's see, Chad, if they need legal advice, what's good? Trustworthy. Okay, thank you, Chad. I would highly recommend maybe organizations like Legal Aid sometimes within different communities. I am going through a whole update at the Center for the Advancement of Human Rights, and you will have the website at the end of this PowerPoint, updating a resource directory for victims of human trafficking, but a lot of different, and it's broken into different counties. Within that directory, there are legal service providers that hopefully are close to you within your area. But if they are not close to your area, doing a Zoom meeting with your students is always helpful. To make sure that your students actually know this information. And because it's very difficult to share this kind of information if you don't have all the legal knowledge on this, definitely going to those guest speakers would be the way to do it. But I have found that students, even if they are not going through anything like this, that they referred friends. And so I've had referrals from my students of their friends who have been victims of violent crimes, of human trafficking, of domestic violence, or other issues that they are facing. So it's good to have it as conversation starters in your communities, and say, well, here are the resources. Maybe that you're not specifically saying, okay, go to this place, because of course you have to take the time to make sure that this is that you're providing a reliable source. But if you would like to point them in the looking at the directory that the Human Rights Center has and seeing if there are any service providers there in your area, I would highly encourage you to do that. Like I said, I will provide that at the very end of the presentation. Other information that you can distribute is already out there. I like to inform my students about fair wages and minimum wage. And this information you can easily find through the Department of Labor. Many times, Department of Equal Opportunity in the state of Florida has this kind of information. I also like to let my students about Know Your Rights information. With Know Your Rights information, I also like to cover information as to what do you do when a police officer stops you, or what happens if my students, if people are undocumented and an ICE agent comes to knock at your house, the door of your house. What exactly do you do? And this different websites, the ACLU has different handouts that you can actually print out. And maybe this is something that you can discuss within your classes. For human trafficking, there is a whole curriculum that has been developed between the Florida Department of Education and the FSU Center for the Advancement of Human Rights. It has lesson plans for like beginner students, intermediate, and advanced. And I will share that with you in the folder. I don't think I have it in the folder right now, but I can easily just drop it into the folder that I'll be sharing with you at the end of our session. So these are all different websites that actually have very useful information for that. Many of my students come and tell me, I want to apply for taxes, but I don't have a social security number. What do I do? And did you know that anybody can actually report taxes? They can ask for an ITIN number. It's an individual tax identification number. They can apply for that and they can report taxes. For some immigration relief, such as cancellation of removal, many judges, immigration judges, will ask, well, you say that you're a person of good moral character. So if you're a person of good moral character, have you been paying taxes? Even though they don't have a social security number. Immigration judges still require this because if they are working, they need to be paying taxes and reporting taxes. Something that it is very important for us now, because a lot of our programs are moving into college and career readiness as well. And as we discussed earlier in the session, is that some of our students already have college degrees and they want to move up, right? And so how to do this, where to direct students. I'm not going to go into the standards as much because we don't have a lot of time, and you have this PowerPoint to review later on. But what exactly, how do we prepare our students for this workforce? We initially talked about that earlier, right? Talking about work culture and talking about the different steps to applying, making sure that it is very hands-on information that you're providing to them, developing those career goals, helping them with preparing resumes. One of my students, came to this was a few years ago, came to my class one day, and we were developing this resumes, and she had work. She was very proud of it, working from home. And then she had a picture of herself right on top of the resume. In many countries, that is a requirement, to have a picture of the person applying right on the top page. And talking to your students what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate. Talking to your students too about how to dress, for interviews, doing mock interviews in the classroom, but also going over employers' expectations, and again, covering the rights of the workers, really making sure that you're contextualizing this kind of instruction, making it very applicable to your students, assigning different tasks, learning different skills within the classroom that actually apply, talking about their own experiences at work, and letting the students actually bring all of that into a conversation session in your class. For beginner students, you can actually do things in the classroom. I love sticky notes in the classroom, in different flashcards, all of that. But also, if you're teaching online, you can always do Jamboards. That's very, very easy to do with your students. Any fear that focus so many negative situations, deportation, domestic violence. Absolutely, Sheldon. I agree. And I think that we build in our classrooms a sense of trust. I'm sure that you have experienced that your students share a lot more with their instructors, with the educators, a lot more than you would think. And because you have built that community in your classroom, and you have built that sense of connection, that safe space for your students, I think that students are going to be able to share a lot more, and it's great for them to actually know that there are resources out there. Online, online job searching, online job applications, finding different websites that are reliable, that you can share within your classes, so that students can see, and comparing also salaries, learning the different abbreviations too that you'll find in job announcements. There are hardly any announcements anymore. Even the places that say hiring now, um, will, if people will come in, they will be instructed to go onto a website to look at the announcement and to apply online. Very rarely do people fill out applications by on paper anymore. It's really online. So gearing our students to actually do this. This is another one of the websites that I have used in my class for students to go and look at different jobs, and you can look at it by the area where you are. It's broken into, if you type in the city, you'll be able to show your students what's available within their city. I like to also conduct mock interviews, but before conducting mock interviews, I also like to show them a little clip as to what an interview would look like. This one is a very good one. I also have a follow-up activity on the Google Drive. It is a little bit longer than I would like it to be, and I like to share some other things with you. But just know that this is on the Google Drive, and that you can review it later. It's one that I would definitely, I have used it in my class, and it has worked really well. And then having students do role play, and having students come up with their own interviews and their own answer, working students, having students working in a with a partner, has always worked really well within my classes. I am not going to share this video, sorry. I'm not going to share this video because I want to share this other one with you that I think it's very important for our students. How many of you have seen that, from the looks of the video right now, that this is a growing industry in actually throughout the entire country? And here in Florida, it's basically only for medical purposes, but students travel. Our students travel to other places, and this is something that can affect our students in the future. How many of you have seen that this is something that it's spreading in your hometown? Have you seen like dispensaries? Have you seen farms? Do any of you have farms within your communities? I know that in Tallahassee, we have one very close by. We have one about 30 minutes away. Okay, let me share this with you because this is something that I think is worthwhile sharing with our students.
Now that the 2020 elections are behind us, there's a lot to talk about. While a great deal of focus is placed on the new administration,
I am sorry. I clicked on it too fast. Okay, now I can click on it.
Changes in policies, it's important to take a look at state and local results for ballot measures and consider how they may impact your life. One standout development you may have noticed after last year's election was how many states either moved to decriminalize cannabis or legalize it for adult recreational use. This change in the tide may signal what could be a broader national effort to legitimize marijuana's future place in American society, but that remains to be seen. As of the beginning of 2021, the number of states that have legalized cannabis now totals 15, with the total number of states allowing cannabis for medical use in some capacity has reached a whopping 36 states, 4 territories, and the District of Columbia. Now, this might seem as though marijuana prohibition is nearing its end, but it's worth noting that at the federal level, marijuana remains a Schedule I narcotic, meaning that the federal government has classified it as illicit and in the same category of controlled substances shared by heroin, MDMA, and LSD. One reason this is important is that if you are a non-citizen, your experiences with or use of cannabis may lead you to face some serious immigration problems down the line. You might ask, how could you be punished when you are obeying state law? Here, it's vital to remember that immigration is governed by federal, not state law. What that means is that the legality of cannabis in your state bears little to no weight when going through several immigration processes, like qualifying for a green card or US citizenship, or coming back into the United States after a trip. There aren't even federal exceptions for medical use, with or without a doctor's recommendation. What's more, it is a known practice for immigration officials, be it in a processing capacity like USCIS interviews or in enforcement settings such as ICE field operations or CBP at the border, to ask individuals if they have possessed or used marijuana. If they answer yes, they can be found inadmissible, denied entry into the United States, or have their application for lawful status or naturalization denied. Depending on the circumstances, it can even make a lawful permanent resident deportable. This is true even if the person was never convicted of a crime and the conduct took place inside their own home. Things can be especially risky at the border. Border officials have been known to take people's phones and look through them for photos or social media related to marijuana. This is where it can get tricky, because if a non-citizen believes that they've done nothing wrong, again because they're following the laws of their state, they may readily admit to an immigration official that they have possessed marijuana. Another legal risk has to do with employment in the cannabis industry. In many steps to qualifying for an immigration benefit, grounds for inadmissibility can be created by participating in any capacity in the industry. In some cases, some USCIS officials have charged that working in a state-licensed marijuana business constitutes drug trafficking, whether or not the individual came in contact with any marijuana itself. Again, this can make the person ineligible to gain lawful immigration status, become a US citizen, or be admitted at the border. So here are some tips for non-citizens, which includes lawful permanent residents and is doubly important for undocumented immigrants when considering marijuana's growing legalization efforts. First, the best advice is to avoid cannabis until you are a US citizen. This might sound harshly restrictive, but it is the one way you can be sure to avoid these risks. Secondly, don't work in the marijuana industry. Again, although business is booming in this area, it may not be worth it if you're looking to qualify for some benefit in the future, which includes gaining your citizenship. Next, if you have a medical need and there is no good substitute for medical cannabis, seek a legal consult first. This will help you at least weigh your options against your risks. You may decide that your medical need is the most important. Never leave your house carrying marijuana, a medical marijuana card, paraphernalia, or accessories like a marijuana t-shirt. Don't have photos or share marijuana-related content on social media. With the growth of Homeland Security surveillance apparatus, it is never a bad idea to be safe on this front. Lastly, never discuss marijuana use or possession with any immigration or border official unless you have legal expert advice that this is okay. If an officer presses you on it, say that you do not want to talk to them and you want to speak to a lawyer. Remember, you always have the right to remain silent. Once you admit to anything, you cannot take it back. If after watching this you still have lingering questions about cannabis and your specific case, it's highly advised that you seek legal support from a trusted service provider. We'll see you next time, and thanks for watching.
Great. So this is something that that I always like to share, not only with my students, but with anyone that that is educating our students as well. I know that this video is kind of advanced for some of our students. However, I've been able to share the video and information and have a conversation around this with students that are in the intermediate to advanced level, and then have had also the discussion about learning about prescriptions. I include this into prescriptions with my lower level students and over-the-counter medication. This substance is treated completely different in other countries, and our students, especially people that are looking to working in different areas. So who do you think ends up working most of the marijuana fields, the marijuana farms? Our own students, many immigrants actually. And just to know that this might affect them in the future to apply for citizenship, if that is the goal that they have, it's good for them to know that there can be challenges in the future for them. So I'd like to share, what does anybody think about this? Any comments on this? Is this something that that some of you knew already? Yeah, a lot of people actually don't, and unfortunately, you think, you know, it's a job, and it is. It is legal here in the state of Florida, right, for medical purposes. Why would it be penalized? Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing. I'm glad to know that now you know this information, and for anybody that had not come across this, and that now you will be able to share it with your students. Some of the websites that I like to use with my students, I'm not going to go over every single one of them, but they're very, very helpful, is looking at career options. Looking at different jobs. This is one called My Next Move, and I like to use this one because you can actually type in anything on here and find, let's say, just personal care aids. It'll tell you, okay, what kind of knowledge you need, skills. And students I have found that love to navigate through this. And then it tells them about, you know, income. And you can go even further and check, okay, what is the income for this kind of job in my state? Then you can actually go and find jobs in listings on here, local salaries. It provides, you know, what the median is, what is the low end, what is the high end. It talks about what kind of education you need, certifications that would be available, finding the right kind of training, if licenses are required. You can actually find all of that through this website. I find it very, very helpful. So I'm going to definitely share this with you. My next move looks like a great resource. Thank you, Laura. I definitely find it very helpful, Laura, and my students love it, and they can explore, navigate through this entire website, and it gives them really, really good information. Okay, so I'm not going to cover absolutely all of that because you actually have the resource there. I mentioned to you earlier that I have all of these different handouts. I share one of you with you already. This is something I mentioned to you that I like to use a lot of pictures, just especially for the beginner students. But you can actually expand with the more advanced students, even using pictures. Jamboards are super, super good for the students because you can actually share. If you're doing an online class, for example, you can actually share and the students are able to provide their own feedback. So I like to do those with them. This is one that actually my students created, and all I did was provided the picture, and then the students were the ones writing all of this. It's very, very simple to do and very useful for the students. This is not a session about Google Apps, but there are tutorials. If you go to YouTube and find tutorials, how to create a Jamboard or how to use a Jamboard, you definitely will be walked step by step. Okay, and how to do this. Something else that I like to talk to them about is bills. Just making sure that our students understand their bills, utility bills, different kinds of bills, to make sure that they're not being overcharged or that there is something wrong, to make sure that they don't carry balances, all of that information. Something else that I have found very helpful with my students, considering that many of them haven't had health insurance and have needed to go to like the emergency room, talking about arranging payments with different providers. Many hospitals will agree to do a very, very minimal amount every month. And as long as the students or the people continue to pay towards that amount, that those bills are not sent to collection. I explained to our students on our consumer section about how it much affects their credit if bills are sent to collection agencies, because that is a concept that many of our students don't necessarily understand. And so it's very important to cover credit, building up credit, and how it affects them if they actually don't pay bills or don't pay certain things on time. Right. This is something that another Jamboard that I created for my students. It has been very helpful because they can move around, especially if you're teaching online. I also want to share this other resource. It's also on the Google Drive, and it has a lot of different websites which have games, worksheets, a lot to do with life skills. So I wanted to share this with you. You don't have to, do anything other than go to the folder. Let me, before I forget, because I know we only have a couple of minutes here, let me go ahead and get the link to this folder and copy it on the chat for you so that you have access to this. Do all of you see it on the chat box? And also Nicole has the link, so she'll be able to share it with all of you after the fact. Sheldon, they must know the consequences for you. Yes, thank you, Sheldon. I absolutely agree, because it's something that is going to affect them for a very long time. Imagine if somebody goes to CIS and they're disclosing that they have worked in that kind of industry, and as a result, they are not going to be able to become US citizens. Skills in the classroom. Well, I don't have to repeat this. I'm sure that you do this already. What I am going to emphasize is building that rapport with your students, asking those kinds of personal questions, making sure that the students, feel like they come to a safe place. It's super important. I don't think that we have, with many of our ESOL students, at least I haven't come across that classroom management issues, even with the multi-level. The only thing is that we need to make sure that we keep it very interactive, especially for those of us that teach in the evenings, because our students come to our classes after a very long day of work. So making sure that our classes are interactive, even if they are online, you can actually make them very interactive. I use a lot of handouts, applications, different programs that you can use online as well, pictures of lots of things, taking pictures around the community and sharing with your students, because that is very relevant. Places where they can go, or schedules, or sharing information about different events, like I mentioned earlier, and the guest speakers for the areas that we don't feel as confident sharing about. This is my my contact information, and I just realized that I didn't share my the center's website on here that I told you about, the resources. So I'm going to include it right now on there for you to have. That's the center's website. And if you go under the area that says research, you'll see that there is a service directory for service. Yeah, it's called a service directory for the entire state of Florida. We're in the process of updating it and adding more service providers to that directory. I want to thank you for your time today. Thank you for the feedback. Please feel free to contact me with any questions you might have. I know that I talk a lot and kind of ran out of time. Nicole, I'm going to give it back to you for further instructions.
Thank you all so much. Don't leave just yet. I have some wrap-up info. I'm going to post the post-webinar survey here in the chat. So I'm going to post it a few times here. So as you'll see, I put the post-webinar survey. Please fill that survey out. We do use your feedback to make sure that our sessions are high quality. Also, in that survey, when you finish and click next at the bottom of the survey, it'll take you to another page where you can request a certificate of completion for this event. So you can get an hour and 15 minutes or 75 minutes worth of credit hours for this. I would also like to thank the Department of Education again for making this event possible. And I think that's all I have. I will be sending the information for this session via email. So if you didn't get a chance to copy and paste it into your browser, I will send it along with the recording after the session. All right, so I think that's all. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon.